Okay guys, Mr. Voigt here. I'm going to go over the parts of the table saw. Pretty important to the parts of the table saw if you're going to be safe running it and basically if I'm going to be able to talk to you about it. So I'm going to do this pretty quick. You can rewind this if you want, but on this table saw I just want to point out before I get going really quick on the parts, it's a SawStop saw. That is a brand name, but they're famous for building into their saws. That's why I have my throat plate or table insert. That's called both throat plate or table insert. Anyway, I have that off so you can see down in here. You can't see it very well, but down here there's a block. It's an aluminum block and they have a piston behind it that when anything touches this blade that conducts electricity, if this blade is running and something touches it that conducts electricity, that aluminum block gets slammed into the blade to stop its rotation and the whole mechanism gets pulled below the table. So theoretically, I can put my hand right on there and I will get just a little tiny cut, but it stops fast enough that I only get a tiny cut instead of cutting me badly or cutting something off. So that's what SawStop is famous for. It's also just a very good table saw. These are called cabinet saws when they're stationary like this with the big cast iron tops on them. Cabinet saws, and they come in different sizes with different horsepower motors and so forth. So anyway, this is where we start. So I stuck my hand in there next to that blade. In doing so, I made sure I cut the power off first. So this is I have to have this on in order for this saw to work. And this little yellow key has to fit into that switch, and it just pushes in and you turn it off and pull it out, and you can't turn the electricity on. So I cut the electrical before I put my hands in there. That's always going to be one of the rules. On any piece of the equipment, they can ask you that question. It's always going to be that you cut the electrical power. In whatever choice they give you, they're going to ask you, before you start working on this table saw, should you get the teacher or should you, they give you all these different choices. And some of them sound like good choices. But they're trying to get in, and one of the choices is always going to be cut the power in some way, and they give you different ways. It's always going to be cut the electrical, okay? Even though some of the other choices sound right, and they're not necessarily wrong, but this is the better answer. They're trying to do safest practice. They're always trying to pound home to you. If you get your hands near things, cut off the power. Anyway, so here I put that back in, I can turn it on. And my lights start flashing. This has these indicators because of the mechanism in there that keeps you safe. So that red light will stop flashing. Once it does stop flashing, we're ready to go. So there it stopped. I got to make sure that my throat plate is on here, my table insert. And this turns on and off by using this paddle. Out is on. And in is off. It's shaped like a paddle. It's pretty easy to turn on. You just, pull it out. And while you're cutting, you need to turn it off. You don't need to put your hands in there and get your fingers in somewhere. You just hit it with your knee or your thigh, and it turns off. So that's pretty good. While we're down here, there's two wheels down here. And then you can see we have a scale. Those are our degrees. What this indicates is when we tilt our blade, what degree tilt are we at, okay? And that is controlled by, believe it or not, the side wheel here. This wheel that is actually connected to it raises or lowers the blade. So if I'm going to turn this wheel, like this, and it's going to, I'm lowering the blade, and I'm raising the blade. So that's your blade height. This is my angle. Okay, if I can get in here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this, and you're going to see that thing move. See the indicator move? And I should be about 10 degrees. And when we look up here, you can see you have a tilt, a 10-degree tilt on that blade. Okay, so this is our angle of cut wheel, and this is our height of cut wheel. Okay, and then our indicator. So coming up here, this is obviously our table surface. In our table surface, we have two grooves. Those are called table slots. Those table slots will take all kinds of different things to two examples of things they receive. This is called a tenoning jig. I'm not going to show you how to use it right now, but as you can see, that jig sits right into that table slot, and it holds things. I actually have it in there backwards. I wasn't really paying attention. But I was more concerned with showing you that it fits in the table slot. You put material over here and cut it. This is called a miter gauge, and I'm going to show you later in another video how to use that. This gets used to make crosscuts, okay? And that uses a slot. Also, we build other things. This is a sled that I use to do certain things, and you can see on the bottom it has its own piece of lumber to fit in the slot. I will put pieces of lumber in those slots and do different things as well. So those are different sleds, also fit in the table slots. Okay, moving up to the blade itself, we have this mechanism. You have obviously the blade, and I better turn this off. We have this blade, and then we have the mechanism up here. This is the guard that covers the blade. And we have what we call the splitter. When the blade cuts through wood, it basically cuts a little groove right through the wood, turns that wood into sawdust. And there's a little space there. That space is called a kerf. And this splitter goes right down that kerf and keeps the wood from closing that kerf. Sometimes wood wants to move and close the kerf and pinch the blade and bind it. And that's not good. That can be dangerous. So they put that piece of metal in there to keep that kerf open so the blade can continue to turn. Makes it safer. They got these little cawls on the side. Those are anti-kickback. As we're pushing the blade, the wood through, sometimes it wants to kind of kick it back because that blade is turning this direction. It wants to kick it back at you. And those are to keep it from actually being able to kick it back at you. So guard, kickback cawls, splitter. And this whole mechanism, if I take my throat plate out, can come out. So I can take my whole guard mechanism off. Now, I don't want to do that unless I have to. There are some cuts that you can't cut with that guard on. Otherwise, I want to keep that guard on because it's safer. All these safety tests we're going to take are using safest practice. So even though it might be easier to do something, you do it the safest way, not the easiest way. Oh, I have a 10-degree tilt on this, so I got to go down and tilt this back up to get my throat plate back on correctly. There we go. Okay, and as you see, my table slots extend into, this is my table extension, that's my outfeed table extension, and those slots so that I can slide things, kind of getting myself in trouble here. So I can slide things past the blade and still not hit that. Otherwise, I would just be able to get it right to there, right? And I wouldn't be able to get past my blade with my crosscut. Okay. Moving on, the other parts to this. We have rails. This is my front rail, and there's a rail on the back. Looks a little bit different. This would be our back rail. Okay, the front rail is the one we pay most attention to. So we have a front rail, and on the front rail is actually they designate this a different part. This is your table ruler. Your table ruler is what you set your fence. This is our rip fence. Okay, so we set our rip fence distance using the table ruler. So the distance on our rip fence, what that is measuring is the distance between this face of my rip fence to this side of my blade. Okay? And that is a pretty accurate measurement. I can come in here and adjust this, and sometimes I have to adjust it, but I try to keep that pretty accurate. So rip fence, used to make rip cuts. And if you don't know what a rip cut is, watch the other video. Made to make rip cuts. All of my cross cuts are going to use a miter gauge, okay? So do not use the rip fence when you use the miter gauge. They do not go together. Does that make sense? Finally, what other part do I have here? If you want to get technical, this is obviously the lockdown handle on our rip fence, so our lockdown handle, and this is called the carriage. A table saw can be as far to the right as you have carriage and table. So this one goes out to 52 inches. So the end of our rail is 52 inches, and that will hold. This carriage will fit all the way out to here. That whole carriage will be on our rail. If this table saw you can go out to 33 inches. So you can't cut as wide of a piece on that table saw. You can keep going. They make extensions beyond 52 inches. So there is no set width for a table saw. There's a reasonable size for them. This is actually a pretty big one. They do go a little bit bigger, but they get kind of impractical if you get too big. We have these hoses are attached to a vacuum system. We like to run the vacuum system. It's broken right now. That's why there's some sawdust on this. I had to cut a few boards, and I didn't get to use the vacuum while I cut them. So I got to bring a hand vac in here and clean this up here in a few minutes. So I think that's most of the parts that you need to know, and hopefully that helps. All right.